Okay, well, we'll get started. Welcome, everyone. My name's Christy Pettis. I'm the Food Standards Manager with Natural Grocers. I'm joined today by our co-hosts, Alan Lewis and Elizabeth Bennett. We're all from Natural Grocers. So these work group meetings that we're doing are focusing on a dual challenge, ensuring that shoppers can trust regenerative claims and preventing brands that don't meet minimum standards from using that term. So our goal is not to create new seals or start a new certification. Our goal is to establish a consensus standard that retailers, brands, and producers can use to match customer expectations. So today's session will specifically address synthetic inputs, including nitrogen and pesticides. So while these inputs are conventional staples, they often conflict with the fundamental principles of regenerative soil health. The primary friction that we must navigate today is economics. Transitioning a farm takes time and carries financial risk. We need to determine several things. One, how do we incentivize farmers and brands during the transition period? Two, which practices should be stopped cold turkey and which require a drawdown? Three, where do we draw a line on inputs that meet informed consumer expectations of the term regenerative? So we want everyone to remember that this initiative is not about calling out conventional producers. It's not about support. It is about supporting commitment to a verifiable regenerative path. So for today, we do have some engagement guidelines for all of the participants. We want to be aware that most of today's participants are very well versed in the principles of regenerative agriculture. This is not a 101 class on what is regenerative agriculture. So please be mindful that questions and comments should really dig deep. Focus your comments on specific points of friction and technical complexity. And please remember that participant cameras and microphones are going to be off until the panel Q&A segment. So you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to send questions for our panel during the panel for our moderators. So don't worry, your cameras and microphones are not malfunctioning at this time. And then during the public discussion segment, you can use the Zoom hand raise feature to request to share your perspective via the Zoom audio. So today we welcome and expect some disagreement. That's partly why we're here. And while we may manage that conflict differently during a Zoom panel, please rest assured that we are collecting all perspectives and they are welcomed. So to that end, you can also access the IFOAM link in the Zoom chat, and that leaves you the option to provide a detailed public comment that will live past this Zoom conversation. So as we move forward, we will look at some of the results that we had from a survey that were sent out. We can move forward. So we sent out a survey after our meetings at Expo West. If you were able to join us and you're here today, that's great. If you were not able to join us at that time, we held 2 sessions during the week of Expo West, digging into this idea of creating a minimum standard for regenerative agriculture claims, specifically in the retail market, and wanting to understand from that group and anyone else that we were able to send the survey to, what do people really think about these specific topics that we're going to dig into? And so you can see some of the survey results here. I won't go through them one by one, but we are going to make this available via email after the fact. But there had been a question as to whether or not we would share these results. And really, we were trying to dig into what is minimally acceptable and what is, really, really required for a claim. So things that would be non-negotiable, nice to have, or not necessary. And then again, as you saw on that next slide, things that would be a top quality verification requirement, things that would be acceptable, things that, we have room for improvement, and things that would be sort of a disingenuous claim. And so that there will be more detailed versions of that available via email. So moving on, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We have Carrie Balcom from American Grass-Fed Association. We have Lindley Dixon from Real Organic Project and John Lundgren from Ecdysis Foundation. And our moderator today is our esteemed colleague, Alan Lewis from Natural Grocers. And so I will pass the mic over to Alan.
All right, thank you, Christy. Just a couple of more comments as we're waiting for a few more people to arrive. Good morning, Alan Lewis. I work at Natural Grocers, but I also sit on the boards of American Grass-Fed, Non-GMO Project, ONHA, and IFOAM North America, which is partly a disclosure that I have a lot of hats I'm wearing today. And I want to thank all of those organizations for their support, especially Real Organic Project, which I was on the founding standards board. I forgot that one. As you listen and engage today, please stay focused on the key problem we are solving. First, we need shoppers to come across regenerative claims in the supermarket and know what those claims mean and why they should trust those products. Second, from the opposite perspective, we need brands that do not yet meet minimum standards for regenerative practices to stop using the term, confusing shoppers, and regenerate their supply chain. Through this cooperative open initiative, we hope to facilitate a consensus standard that all food retail and institutional buying offices can use to identify products that do not qualify as regenerative yet. Then those brands can be asked to improve their labels to support transparency and honesty with their customers. It's pretty simple, but it's not. At the same time, a consensus standard will empower food shoppers to challenge their favorite retailers about products they are selling under regenerative claims that may not add up. We're going to see today that every farm and every product is unique, and missteps and setbacks in agriculture are a given. Yet if every farmer was guaranteed a parity profit while moving away from conventional GMO systems toward regenerative and organic production, we could inspire a lot more change faster. Lastly, in this stakeholder process, we will naturally cultivate disagreement and dissent. That's the goal. However, we may manage this conflict during a formal Zoom session. Rest assured that we are collecting written public comments on all of the topics that we'll cover, and you can submit those anytime on the event page on ifoamnorthamerica.org. Christy, did you do the introductions? I'm sorry. For the panelists?
I just did a brief introduction of our panelists, but I'm happy to jump in and do that again.
Yeah, why don't you jump in and do those?
Sure. So we have Carrie Balcom from the AGA. She's the executive director of American Grass-Fed Association. We have Lindley Dixon from Real Organic Project, executive director, and we have John Lundgren, executive director of the Ecdysis Foundation.
And those full bios are on the event page on ifoamnorthamerica.org, including links to their different organizations. So, panelists, are you ready? Are we ready to have some fun? Okay. Jonathan, you're first. We're talking in three different sections: synthetic fertilizer, and then breaking down pesticides into herbicides, and then we'll move on. But for synthetic fertilizers, let's start with one of the easier issues, which is ending the use of synthetic nitrogen derived from fossil fuels used to bump up yields, at least temporarily. Can you just tell us why synthetic nitrogen is not a full solution, and how can fertility be maintained in other ways in regenerative systems?
Right. What we're after, so yes, we've visited hundreds, thousands of farms across North America at this point, trying to figure out what some of the key levers are in terms of making or achieving regenerative outcomes. And it inherently is linked to growing life on farms, biodiversity in all of its forms. One of the things with synthetic fertility, one of the dangers of it is that it replaces what the natural world does or biodiversity does on these farms, and makes it very difficult. It puts the farmer onto a treadmill where they become very dependent on additional synthetic inputs and for fertility inputs. Normally, under a normal functioning ecosystem, what you end up seeing is fungal and bacterial populations that make soil-bound nutrients available for plants or animals, depending on the situation. And when you start to try to goose that system forward using synthetic fertilizers, it ends up selecting for a microbial community that can no longer perform those basic functions. And so yes, for that reason, then the farmer becomes dependent on additional fertilizers.
And that's where introducing small amounts or transitioning out of it becomes such a problem because it continues to undermine literally the nutrient producing systems in the soil.
Right. I mean, what we're really talking about is an addiction scenario. And the only real way to stop that is first you got to stop using the drugs.
An intervention. Okay, the white van pulls up and
Yeah.
off we go. Lindley, Real Organic Project. What would you add to that when you focus on your experience with other sources of fertility and certified organic agriculture? It doesn't seem to be a problem there.
Yeah, a lot of farmers know how to do it without, and it's actually very directly linked to whether or not you get a pest problem. So if you apply too much fertility, and the pesticide companies figured this out really early, they funded a lot of studies that showed that the more synthetic fertilizers you add, the higher yields you get. Well, secretly, what they were excited about is the fact that you need a lot more pesticides to get rid of all those insects that were really attracted to your crops. So these two are directly related. I'm lucky enough to have postdoc research in mycorrhizal systems. And the second that you add any readily available fertility, there's no interest in that, symbiotic relationship happening with the roots. And that's where you get a lot of carbon drawdown. You get a lot of long lasting carbon compounds in the soil with all that soil life. And I remember when we were interviewing Michael Pollan for the Real Organic podcast, he said, organic's great, but you didn't know about climate change back then. And so regenerative is going to address climate change. And, if you look just at the amount of total greenhouse gases related to synthetic fertilizers, it's anywhere between 2 to 5% of total greenhouse gas emissions. So it's just a no-brainer when it comes to climate. And then 2/3 of that is related to the nitrous oxide that's released after the field application. So it's just, if we care about climate into the future, and I believe that customers do, this is just a no-brainer one. Farmers know how to do it without, like you said, there's a treadmill. So things only get worse with the other synthetics, and customer expectation is right there with it for climate.
So Gary Balcom, American Grass-Fed, you are overseeing hundreds and thousands of grass-fed ranchers, grass-fed from right up to the last day. And I consider that one of the great regenerative successes in the United States. So let's challenge you on this. Do any of your producers look to synthetic nitrogen to grow grass, to feed their livestock? And is there any circumstances there where you've seen that happen?
Hi, Alan, and welcome everybody. The move away from synthetic nitrogen by our producers, people that are in good pasture-based production systems, people who have used it in the past, once they realize that they've got to change some dynamics in the way they're doing it, the dependence on synthetic nitrogen in a pasture-based system will not allow the animal units to increase by using that, because it doesn't allow for soil health and all of those other things that Jonathan and Lindley, those great scientists, can tell you about. But it's a journey, not a destination. And we find, especially when we bring on other species, that it's a learning curve that we're doing. And with these pasture-based production systems, there's a very dear friend of ours who if you don't know, you need to know, is Will Harris from White Oak Pastures. And he said using synthetic fertilizers is like peeing on your pants when it's cold. It seemed like a good idea at the time, but it doesn't really affect any change. So we're very cautious with taking somebody who wants to go the regenerative label of saying you can't do this, you can't do that. And with the research and the resources that we have available and teaching them how to get away from that system. Very few people in the pasture-based production system are using them, but if they have been using them in the past, we want to teach them how not to, instead of not telling them not to use them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but Jonathan, real quick, gonna go back. Is there any moment or any circumstance where you would endorse using a synthetic fertilizer during a regenerative transition? Or
Yeah, I mean, generally, I think that there has to be, we kind of lump farms into industrial conventional, industrial regenerative, and regenerative. And in the industrial regenerative, they're more likely to be trying to replace some of their old methods of their conventional tools with regenerative tools. And in that scenario, there's oftentimes synthetic fertilizers that are still employed, maybe an herbicide spray that's still employed. If the goal of this is to maximize regenerative outcomes, be that carbon capture and storage, reversing desertification, increasing nutrition, reducing or eliminating pollution, making farmers more resilient, you are not going to maximize those outcomes unless you get off of the jugs. And so, yeah, can the industrial regenerative do better than a conventional industrial model? Yeah, you're going to move the needle. But if our goal is to actually use our food system for solving some of these problems, then we need to change our mindset and how we approach problem solving on our farms.
we have a few minutes left on this segment. I want to pitch this to all of the panelists. You may have heard about some disruptions in the Middle East fossil fuel supply, which is leading to increased prices and decreased availability of these synthetic fertilizers, synthetic nutrient sources. And just because someone's going to mention it, the sodium nitrate from Chile is completely unable to substitute for that, and there's almost no infrastructure left to mine it. Is this a moment where this crisis in agriculture could benefit regenerative in the long run? Can we use it as a catalyst?
Oh,
Lindley, you're shaking your head. Or Carrie, go ahead. Sorry.
absolutely. It's in the news. It's on social media. It's in the farm stores. You know, the prices of the sticker shock. If you are using, if you are using synthetic fertilizers, then you're going to get sticker shock on what it's going to cost you now to do that. So we're getting some with people who want to go into a pasture-based system and become part of grass-fed and certification, that kind of thing. They're looking for education for people, for us to give them resources on how to get away from it. And then, like Jonathan said, get off the jugs. Because, yeah, sticker shock is huge right now. And with premiums being what they are, they're not going to make up for it. They're just, with the limitations, the other limitations in our system right now with beef prices and poultry prices and hog prices and everything in the United States, and trying to buy domestic product. It's gonna, yeah. And I could go on for days, but I think Jonathan and Lenny can weigh in here as well. I think sticker shock is going to be the one thing that's going to drive the change.
Jonathan, are your people dancing a jig in front of the co-op, knowing that they don't have to order that ammonia coming out?
I think we need to change our mindset away from a globalized food commodities, right? And that means that we need to be thinking about how to generate our own fertility locally or within our communities. That doesn't need to be hyper local, but I do think that relying on globalization has really hurt our farming communities and our national security as a result of that.
Lindley, I wanted to have you answer that question, but with a spin on it. Are you seeing that the competition for natural fertility, compost, or whatever else is out there, municipal waste, is there a new competition from the conventional market to use those materials?
You are hearing the organic community talk a lot more about growing their own fertility. That is a hot topic. It was featured in our conference last year. Uh, I've kind of been the weird person my whole life that celebrates high gas prices when they happen. I drive an electric car and I farm with very little gas in our tractor, mostly to store our compost pile. But yeah, I think that what happens during these times is that the farmers go out of business and you have more consolidation and therefore a loss in democracy in our food system. And so we really need to support the farmers in the transition and even in the marketplace. I mean, that transitional organic label was meant to do that. I don't think it actually ended up doing that, but we do need to support farmers when this happens, transitioning away from these synthetics that rely on fossil fuels.
Any last thoughts from the panel before we move on to the herbicide question? All right, I think we're good. Go ahead, Jonathan.
There's a lot of ways that farmers are doing this. Plants and animals are your best tools. They're widely available. They increase the resilience of your operation. This isn't just an ideology or hand waving. There are farmers that are developing systems where this is simply not needed anymore. The question becomes, how do you get that information to the producers that don't believe it or that are interested in changing but don't know how?
Thanks for that. And we're going to move on to herbicides, but I want to take the opportunity to remind attendees that we're getting the retailers involved as gatekeepers because retailers pay the price, promote the products, give it shelf space. This is what all the panelists are talking about. We need retailers to stop taking the shortcuts on what they order and promote and step into this regenerative issue for climate reasons, health reasons, environmental reasons, and economic reasons. So that's my little manifesto. Hey, herbicides, synthetic herbicides. So we're going to start with herbicides used in GMO cropping systems, such as glyphosate, glufosinate, dicamba, 2,4-D, etc. And the GMO cropping system itself is suspect, as I think everyone here agrees, given the lack of biodiversity, beneficial insects, proprietary seeds, dependence on synthetic nitrogen, concentration of ownership and control, and use of taxpayer subsidies. Yet some farmers, who may be on the call, claim that these herbicides are absolutely necessary in a regenerative system, if not just a regenerative transition. So, Lindley, I want to start with you. Can regenerative farms employ synthetic herbicides in good faith, and can they maintain consumer trust when they do? And how would Real Organic Project respond to such use, even if it's de minimis?
Well, I feel like I should open with the fact that traveling to organic farms across the country to certify farms with the Real Organic Project, even within the organic movement, there were so many different definitions for regenerative. I would come to one farm and they would use it to say, look, our practices are organic and beyond. And they go to the next farm and they'd say, I've never felt like the word regenerative relates to the way I farm because I've never degenerated my soils. You know, my whole farming career, my soils have been healthy, so I don't need to regenerate them right now. So even amongst the organic community, there's no consensus on what regenerative means, but the consensus is very clear that you don't need synthetic herbicides to farm. And we actually have a whole farm standard. So as an add-on label, that it's like, even if you have a thistle outbreak or an invasive, there's a time of year to go out there with a shovel and stab underneath it, and it's just as fast, as going out there with a sprayer. So with our whole farm standard, sometimes we have to say goodbye to farms that are doing that, and then, maybe pair them up with someone who has had a similar problem in their region and did not use the synthetic herbicide. So I think that the customer, even if we're confused within the organic movement about what regenerative is, the customer is for sure going to be very confused about it. But glyphosate is, even if it's pronounced wrong, it is a hot topic right now. And, most customers, as soon as they find out that that's being used under a regenerative seal, that is going to do a lot of harm to the movement. And I can stop there, but I have a lot more to say on herbicide use with no-till.
Lindley, you get your own conference, so thank you for being concise.
So if you have any questions, I'll answer that one later.
Carrie, speaking specifically of ruminant ranchers, because we're going to have a whole separate session on hogs and poultry, but do any of your AGA ranchers depend on the widespread use of herbicides, typically glyphosate or others, either to grow GMO crops, to control aggressive plant species, and are there ruminant producers in your group who incorporate herbicides, synthetic herbicides, as a regular practice?
No. And having said that, is that we have some ranches that are extremely large. And when you take a ranch that's 10,000, 12,000 acres, and they have an outbreak of an invasive, you can't go out with a shovel and dig it up. And it's just not effective. There are methods that can be used to get rid of invasives, teaching animals or ruminants to eat weeds and things that are invasive. You can burn, you can do those kind of things. It's hard to say what prudent use of synthetic herbicides are, but people who are doing what movement to regenerative are not using these herbicides because it's not good for them. They're not seeing good soil health. They're not being able to increase their animal units on their land and that kind of thing. And as far as the people who are doing amp grazing or any kind of grazing, there are ways to get rid of those invasives without having to, and if you have to use them, there are alternatives to synthetics that are allowed in the organic system that will help with that too. So again, we don't like to say don't do that. We're going to try and make people aware. Here's what you can do. It's an education.
Yeah. Jonathan, what's the advice you give about synthetic herbicide use to the thousands of regenerative farms you're coaching?
Oftentimes the trade-off is, well, either I have to till or I have to spray herbicide. If those are really the only two options that you think you have, then you're dead in the water before you even get started. You've got other tools that are available, and neither of those tools are going to maximize your outcomes, okay? We've been working with farms in Canada as well as in the Palouse area of Washington. These are growing cash grain systems. These are at scale. 2/3 of the farmers are abandoning all synthetic fertility as well as all herbicides. And they're still producing just as much yield. They are actually growing more nutritious wheat in at least half of the micronutrients that we've been measuring. And so, yeah, it's not a question of can this happen? It's more of a question of how do we support farmers to understand that there is another way.
I'll tell you from my experience, even in organic, if you've done everything else soundly and sensibly according to the rules and you still have a significant problem like an invasive weed, you can request a variance from the USDA for one-time use, but it is complicated and it's not thrown around like candy. We'll maybe dig into that later with you, Lindley, in a written comment, but I want to move to this as on the synthetic herbicides. Desiccants, the use of herbicides to desiccate crops just prior to harvest seems to be one of the biggest sources of pesticide contamination in food and a real trigger for consumers, especially in the MAHA movement. Do any of you believe that chemical desiccation has a place in a regenerative farming system? There's a no from Jonathan. Lindley?
No.
Right. Would you mind, Jonathan, just so I don't go on and on just telling people why chemical desiccation is being used, and why it's not necessary.
It tightens up the flex, or it gives more flexibility in terms of harvest. And so you can dry your crop down with an herbicide in order to facilitate harvesting with a combine over broad acres. And so yeah, but the reality is that a lot of that pesticide ends up getting into the grain at that point and becomes problematic for consumers. So,
And ends up on the soil as well, I imagine.
absolutely, it ends up in the water. It ends up in the soil. It ends up in places it was never intended to be, and with real environmental and human health consequences.
Carrie, any thoughts there?
It's not needed.
It's not, yeah, we could all say this, but absolutely not. Again, it's one of those things that you don't need to depend on it. It's not, no. Sorry, I'm not gonna riff on Jonathan's thing, so go ahead.
I'll make one other challenge to everybody since we're trying to dig in. I know dryland farmers in eastern Colorado, western Nebraska, and they use a thin pass of glyphosate early in the spring, just when the weeds are coming up, and they'll do a pass of drilling their crop seed in and as they say, kiss those weeds goodbye with a thin spray of glyphosate. And they are adamant that this works, that it's defensible, and it has no negative outcomes. This is going to be one of those challenges for all of us. But would you guys like to chime in on that claim that it's a way to do dryland agriculture that's acceptable?
Are those farmers that you're talking about, who are they growing their grain for? Is this for livestock? Is this getting put onto a rail car that goes to Asia? Who's growing this?
It
Because
can
if there
be
are,
lentils, it can be sunflower seeds, oil seeds. They're rotating their crops pretty aggressively, a regenerative practice, but they're claiming that this early pass means that they have to spend a lot less diesel and cultivating and tilling later on and potential spraying later on by stopping the emergent weeds.
I can tell you from our own farm, I thought that regenerative could include herbicides, and I used low levels of herbicides when we were getting blue dasher up and off of the ground. Within 2 years, I had annual weeds all over my farm. And I'm like, but there was a couple of strips, and Jay Fuhrer and I were walking out there and I couldn't explain it. I'm like, I don't know, maybe that was a wheel track or something. And he said, John, that's where your sprayer missed. We had perennial plants, that were, the prairie was coming back in. The only place that I had annual weeds was where I used herbicides. And that's the day I stopped using herbicides.
Anyone else want to chime in?
Well, if you're grazing over native pasture, it's just counterintuitive that you're gonna, there's why. And I think that the consumer having been, and through the retailer having been made aware of the downside of the herbicide use, the unregulated use of herbicides is just not something they want to put in their bodies or their children's bodies or on the bottom of their shoes. And so, and for improved pasture, the same thing. If you're trying to grow really nutritious forages, it seems counterintuitive to kill it with herbicide.
I think everyone's aware that these synthetic herbicides are going to skyrocket in price. I think they've already doubled and they may quadruple over the next year. Again, I'm trying to insert a little bit of optimism here. Is that going to catalyze more of this regenerative thinking? I got nothing. Look at John's
I'll
face.
jump in, Alan. I know a lot of dryland farmers in my region who, don't get certified organic, but use a lot of organic practices. And in the combination of the right timing for the fall cover crop planting and deep enough seed drilling, you can get a cover crop without irrigation in Southwest Colorado here, where they're growing dry beans, dry land. So it is done. It's done with a lot of knowledge, and it does include tillage in the spring and instead of that glyphosate run. And that's because you're incorporating a lot of biomass. And from that cover crop, if you have a diverse cover crop planting, you get your fertility throughout the whole next season by incorporating the cover crop. Because in these dry environments, the cover crop just sits on the soil surface and it doesn't provide the fertility for that coming season. And so, the quick to break down legumes will provide early season fertility, and the grasses will provide later season fertility. So this is how tillage, when you're using it with biomass, can control weeds and fertility. And so, but this is very skilled knowledge that comes over time of place for what cover crop mixes to use, when to seed, how deep to seed, how to time it with the weather forecast. And this type of research and knowledge exchange is what we need to be investing in.
Thanks for that. During our sessions at Expo West, there was a contingent, we call them the no-till contingent, that, to be frank, got a little bit schooled about tillage, cultivating, and incorporating green manure into soil to reestablish the nutrient profile. And it really opened their eyes to the different kinds of tillage, to the point where we're having a separate session on that in the next few months to dig into where that is very useful and how it can be done, and setting aside the deep 12, 16-inch tillage into bare ground that's common across the heartland. Last thoughts, anybody?
I would encourage you to have the no-till organic folks add that discussion as well. I think that's where you're really going to maximize your benefits, at least from our perspective. And then another last thought from me would be the goal of regenerative agriculture is to deliver on these outcomes. Life is one of the biggest levers of generating positive outcomes on your farm, getting biodiversity out there. We did a study in cash grain production in the northern tier states. We looked at the effects of various practices on insect populations as one proxy for biodiversity at large. You want to kill a bug, spray an insecticide. You really want to kill a bug, spray an herbicide. And use fertility, use synthetic fertilizers. Those had more deleterious effects on the invertebrate populations than the insecticides did.
Perfect segue to our third segment here on synthetic insecticides and fungicides. I'm going to start with a very specific question, but seed coatings from the big seed companies that often contain neonicotinoids, those are persistent in soil. They enter the plant tissue and the flowers, enter the food chain, highly toxic to pollinators and other life. So this is for all of you. Do any of you believe that seed coatings with neonics have any place in a regenerative farming system?
The quickest conversion to organic is a farmer who has just drilled in coated seeds and they see dead birds in their field. I mean, I've heard that story so many times. This is how I found organic.
Yeah. We, a lot of, like I say, absolutely not. And for our farmers who are trying to graze animal units over that kind of thing, they're seeing the same thing, not only birds, but anything, and bees, whatever. Just, it's one of those things, just don't do it.
And from an agronomic standpoint, they're not helping farmers. This was, I mean, in one of the more brilliant marketing schemes that was ever perpetrated on the American farmer, large chemical companies created a problem that didn't exist and then sold the solution to that problem to the tune of billions of dollars a year. And the deterioration of our grandkids. Shame on them.
Jonathan, you've touched on this already, but for everyone else, the Igdisis Foundation that you founded lists reducing or eliminated agrochemicals as one of the 6 principles of regeneration. And you work with thousands of farms in your studies and in your coaching. Is there any fuzzy gray line on synthetic pesticide use that you've come up against where there's any justification for it in limited circumstances?
Listen, when you're on the front lines, right, and your neighbors aren't doing a good practice and causing issues for your farm, the fear of losing everything is real, right? But you have to be thinking about your farming operation from a multi-year perspective, from a generational perspective, and building a system that is resilient against those things. All right, these pest outbreaks that might end up happening, okay? By diversifying, by keeping animals in different cropping scenarios, perenniality, heritage varieties that had inherent resistance to a lot of these pest problems. A lot of our regenerative producers are able to generate systems that work, okay? And I think that's the line that I tend to use with farmers that that find themselves in a dire circumstance.
Well, let me put a twist on this question. I know farmers who are adjoining conventional operations, certified organic farms that are adjoining conventional operations, and they end up testifying against pesticide restrictions and herbicide restrictions because they want their neighborhood farm not to have weeds that make their way over into the organic farm or the regenerative farm. I know it's an odd question and a little bit out of scope, but how would you deal with that issue where you've got a really weedy conventional farm that's not using any sound regenerative practice or organic practice, but is also not controlling their weeds in any other way?
I mean, weed seed is everywhere. So I hate to just like point to someone and say it's your fault. You know, it's blowing in from all over the place. And organic farmers know how to manage it. And just really want to stress, I don't think I've stressed it enough, that right now we have a food system that we are putting money from the Farm Bill into the conventional system. And if we pulled the plug on that, we would have so much research that could go into weed management, or, you know, even how to desiccate with things that, like, you know, perhaps vinegar or other things that are not as detrimental. So I feel like we just have organic farmers have always done the research themselves and have had to like then share that with the conventional farmers because these systems work everywhere, and we have not done enough to support the organic farmers in transitioning and maintaining. And some of these you know, I'm thinking of orchards, you know, the viruses that are very specific to pests, and these are very sophisticated pheromone controls, and it's really impressive. And the potential, we are just at the very tip of the iceberg for what we could do to, you know, just better manage our organic farms for weeds and pests.
And Carrie, your ranchers have they don't like pesticides. They want active soil. They want the beetles in the dung. They want biodiversity in the fields. Are there any ranchers that think that spraying pesticides or insecticides are a benefit?
Well, I can't make broad sweeping statements, but I'm going to say broad sweeping statement, no. And just
Right.
This is anecdotal on my part, is that I'm now keeping bees on my little place. And my neighbors are so excited to have the bees there, and they're being very cautious, and they're very excited to see the diversity that's coming back to my place, and also the wildlife. And I'm in a critical area in South Florida, and they're excited to see the bees coming over and being part, and they're very cautious about using, you know, petrochemicals. on their land and thinking about it. So it's very interesting.
Hey, John, real quick on a regenerative claim, someone who we hear this a lot, they're going to reduce pesticide use by 90% in the long run. Is that enough to be regenerative, or that's just laziness? Sorry.
Quick, can I ask Carrie a
Sure.
quick question? I'm sorry.
Sure.
About porons, Carrie, do you find that the ranchers that you're interacting with, do they still use ivermectin or anything like that?
Jonathan, they don't know, and when we pointed out to them that it's killing the dung beetles, they say, well, what else can I do?
Yeah.
So when they're transitioning, they're still using those things, but it's a drawdown,
Yeah.
and they're learning that they shouldn't do that.
Good management can combat that, can't it?
Yes, it can. And once they realize, when they go out there and don't see dung beetles, and then they realize the life cycle of what's happening there, then it really it's an awakening.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
staying out of feedlots is kind of the first step on that.
Yeah.
So switching gears a little bit on this topic, beyond powders and sprays, new technologies are creating synthetic pollinators, genetic trait triggers applied to leaves, new systemic pesticides within plant tissue at the genetic level, novel soil microbes that they say will fix agriculture, save farmers, and end climate change. But those are all there supporting and continuing the use of GMO cropping systems. Do you have any comment on how much of this technology might find its way into regenerative farming, since it's being pitched so hard as regenerative, and what that would mean to regenerative or organic claims? Did I get everybody triggered now? Because Lindley, the biotech industry is pushing synbio into organic, saying that organic won't survive without it. So I see you're not amused.
Well, I'm lucky I have a plant pathology background, and so much of what regenerative and organic systems, the mindset is biodiversity. And so much of these tech, we call them wizards, that they oversimplify the system, and it's just a different way of thinking, and the system breaks down. And there are so many examples from my plant pathology world where, like southern corn leaf blight happened because we tried to insert the same cytoplasmic genes into all of the corn varieties across the country. And so even though there was different genetic diversity in the nucleus, it was genetically uniform in the cytoplasm. And then we just had this huge wipeout from this fungus over a series of years. So that's where vulnerability comes in. And so it's just a completely different mindset. And I know that there's genetic modifications that have reduced pesticide use, and I'm thinking of the papaya, and that was the first GMO that was introduced. But that doesn't sell a lot of chemicals when you produce a GMO that actually reduces your need for an insecticide. And so the reality is that, there's these great publicly funded labs that find these really kind of interesting GMOs that would reduce pesticide use. And as long as we use them with a diversity of other traits, I don't see a problem with it, but that's not the reality of how they're used, because you can't sell an input with it. So they kind of just die on the shelves because the world doesn't want GMOs, because what we're introducing are GMOs with an input, a harmful input that comes with it. So we live in a complicated world. These are complicated ideas. And we need to be like adults about these conversations and really admit like what these technologies mean. But aside from that, it's just a different way of thinking. So I am not the common point of view in the organic world. Organic does not allow GMOs, and the reason for that, I believe, is that there's just too much corporate power to bring in a GMO that's used for the wrong reasons. I just think of Einstein, and like you can have an atomic bomb come from this technology, or atomic power. And so it's just like, it's not the technology itself, it's how it's being used that's a problem. But I don't actually see any way around combating with the how much power these pesticide companies have in agriculture, I don't see any way around these technologies being used for bad. And it also is, they're not necessary because it's a mindset of diversity, and they tend not to come with diversity. So that is a personal point of view.
Okay.
A lot of greed in this world, isn't there?
Yeah, Alan, you put up their producer's approach to use pesticides on crops. The people who are the producers that are using pasture, they're tilling in different seed, but they're doing it's a smorgasbord. It's not just one thing that they're cropping when they're letting these animals graze over. Salad bars, one term they use, all those kinds of things. And in those kinds of systems, those different species are symbiotic. They work together and they'll crowd out invasives. So the use of it's not really a crop; it's a grazing system. And I'm trying to keep the terminology a little different here, but they're not grazing over crops. They're grazing over tilled improved pastures and that kind of thing. But there's clover, and Jonathan, we can name 25 things that they can put down when they do that kind of thing. It'll help with the diversity.
In a second, we're going to move to a couple of questions that have been posed. But before we move on, I just want to ask everyone as briefly as possible, which is kind of a joke. Can you describe the end result? Because regenerative agriculture is often described as some sort of permanent transition, but transitioning to what? Are you all clear on where this needs to end up in order to create a really viable system and increase consumer trust and retailer interest in regenerative claims?
The end point is organic.
Oh.
Sorry.
The end point is viable organic that can make a profit.
Right.
Jonathan? Yeah.
So we view regenerative as outcome-based, and under different contexts, maximizing regenerative outcomes ends up being achieved through various approaches. Okay. Invariably, reducing or eliminating, I'll go so far as to saying that a lot of the jugs from your system ends up producing the most regenerative outcomes that we have available to us. Precise management, like for example, and Carrie could probably talk at length about this, there is no one size fits all in terms of stocking density, grazing period, and rest period. It depends on what your rainfall pattern is that year. It has to be adaptive. And so when talking about outcomes that a consumer could rely on, I mean, I can rely on certain proxy practices that represent those outcomes, okay? And with a certain level of precision, I can tell you what the nutrient or the food quality of that particular product is going to be. And so if there is some way of verifying that a producer is using a suite of practices, then I can tell you how good the food is going to be at the end of the day. And maybe if that's one outcome that we're after from a consumer's standpoint, then I think that that's great. But
Gary, parting shot, or are you good?
No, I just want to say that in organic, you're controlling inputs. So for crops and orchards and fruits and vegetables, that's a really great system. For pasture-based production, you want to have those animals out on the land as long as possible. So we, instead of having access to pasture for 120 days, that means 240 days that they can be confined, but as long as they're feeding organic grains or whatever, then they're considered organic. So a lot of our producers are not organic for that reason, because they can't get organic hay and that kind of thing without being outrageously expensive. So it's just one of those things. And when people see organic, meat you have to ask the question, is this animal allowed to be outside, or is it being confined and fed organic? So that's for us is really good. And we allow, that 8 months that they're allowed to be inside under the organic rules, and the Real Organic Project was working to change that. And that's kudos to them. So but right
And
now
a full session on livestock, regenerative livestock practices will be upcoming as well, because as you guys have pointed out, it's incredibly detailed and complex when it's done right. So Elizabeth, would you mind reading Kate Kavanaugh's question for the panel?
Christy actually is going to read those.
Oh, Christy,
Sure.
You're on.
Yeah, so we have a question from Kate Kavanaugh. It reads, what about hay and pasture-based feeding systems and the use of synthetic fertilizers in hay production? With cattle eating hay 3, 5, 6 months out of the year, how does this work into how you see regenerative?
Well, I don't.
Go ahead.
It's cost prohibitive to feed hay 5, 6, 7, 8 months out of the year. So that's going to have to be something you just can't afford to do it, without, if you're doing, and then, so you're going to have to minimize hay use and increase your density of your soil health and that kind of thing. So that's something. If they're confining and feeding hay, then it's not a pasture-based system. It's a confinement system.
How about
And
bale
probably a bit
grazing
outside
there?
of regenerative. Go ahead, Jonathan.
How about bale grazing in winter pastures?
Yeah, but the other thing is too, is that if they're outside, then they're also being introduced and available other sources of nutrients and proteins and energy sources. So, and it's a sticky one, and we're going to have lots and lots of conversation about that.
Can I respond real quickly? Because here you might get a little disagreement, because here is where I see that organic has gotten it right with process mattering, not outcomes, because you'll see these regenerative farms just bring in so much hay and it's all sprayed, and they'll talk about the organic matter in their soil, and they're maybe not using a regenerative system of rotation. They're very much getting these soil tests, and that's outcome based, but they didn't grow that organic matter, they just brought it in, and that is not very climate friendly. So we have to look at the whole process and not just the outcome.
Yeah.
We also have to be very cognizant of the fact that organic hay or non-GMO hay is horribly expensive. So we have to increase how much of that we're growing to reduce that cost to the farmer. If it's just, when you triple
and encourage those pasture-based systems so that they don't depend on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The way we think of and this is particularly acute in dairy systems for us, is we've really struggled with what is a regenerative dairy, right? And there's kind of 3 different legs to the stool as far as I can figure. And each of those legs has to meet certain qualifications in order to be regenerative. There's the pasture and how they're managing those animals when they're out on the ground. There's the feed source, be it if it's a grain-based system or a hay-based system. We have to know where and how that feed is being produced. And then there's the animal welfare aspects of it. And so when they are getting milked in the barn or whatever, then how are those animals being treated? Do they, yeah. And so when you start thinking about it as a system, you can't just be focused on one leg of the stool.
Yeah.
And ironically, we're setting up this series of sessions based on each silo within the system.
Mhm.
But that's just a logistical problem of getting comments that are focused. And anyone who wants to put a system comment in, I'm all for it. That's definitely where we end up. Okay, Brian Baker's question, Christy.
Yeah. So Brian Baker asks, quote, integrated already provides an established label for food produced by a system that allows for limited and more efficient use of synthetic farm chemicals, including pesticides. Why can't retailers, brand owners, and producers use the more accurate label, quote, integrated or quote, IPM to describe agricultural products grown with substances prohibited for organic production?
I'm gonna,
So integrated pest
just-
management, but follow the national list that organic has.
yeah, I'm gonna dive in just real quickly, and Christy, the operative word there is labeling, and we have to have better labeling. Big time, and if we don't do that, we're all sitting out here spinning our wheels, say, pick me, pick me, pick me, and they're allowing people to mislabel. Sorry, I'll get off my bandwagon now.
Has labeling worked? I mean, where are we at?
Well, we did get.
I feel like whenever we label something, it instantly becomes corrupted because of the prescriptive nature of labeling. Maybe there's a way of explaining what's in the product and letting and getting away from that concept of labeling. Maybe it's front of package nutrient contents or something like this. If you buy this product, it means that you're getting this level of nutrition versus, yeah, you might be spending a dollar less or something. I don't know. Maybe I'm being Pollyanna about it, but I just haven't seen a lot of labels work.
I think that they can work. Right now, the way they're set up is for not really for the farmer to profit. It's a lot of times the brands end up with all that markup that they end up getting. It needs to be free for the farmers. That's, how we've set up our add-on label. Unfortunately, USDA organic is not free. So we already inherently are sitting on a problematic program, but we're trying to reform that. And in Europe, there are countries where organic certification is free. That's the way it should be. And the profit needs to trickle back to the farmer. Anything is going to get corrupted. If you don't label it, it will get corrupted faster. But of course, you need to end up defending your labels and constantly improving. And we've seen them get weaker and weaker over time. The first question we got asked is, when will the real organic project exist? So you constantly need to be protecting. But I think we've got a good foundation for not charging the farmers for the seal. Therefore, we are not dependent on, the brands and the seal being used in order to profit ourselves. And then you have a conflict of interest.
So one of the things that kind of is on my mind a lot is, I mean, the answer to this, and Lindley, I'll bet you'd agree, is knowing your farmer, right? And that trust and that relationship becomes so important. Are retailers capable of that? Are retailers capable of number one, getting away from the greed that kind of pervades here, but also working on behalf of their consumers in order to maintain that relationship?
Can I hand that to Christy? Because that's her job, and you're going to be impressed with what we do.
I was reading the next question, Jonathan. I may need you to repeat yourself.
Oh, okay.
He wants to know
managing
how
the next
retailers
Q&A.
engage with individual farms
Yeah,
to ensure
we do.
practices and communicate that to consumers.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big part of my job. I oversee the food standards for natural grocers. I talk and email and go to farms and ranches. That's how we develop our standards, is by walking in the fields with farmers and ranchers, listening to what their challenges are, and then trying to create standards that make sense from a farmer perspective, and then being willing to try and dig in with customers on areas that they may feel confused about. Why do you have this standard? We say because it's based on what's best for the farm and for the animals, the health of the land and soil, the animal welfare that we want to see, that allows animals to exhibit their natural behaviors, eat a diet that's designed for their health and nutrition, not for their weight gain. And then really taking as much time as we can with customers to educate them on those things. But I know that's a unique thing that Natural Grocers does.
It does
That's
sound
different.
unique. So how do you, okay, I'm sorry to, yeah, you said I could just talk off the cuff. How
Keep
do,
going.
one more, I'll just do one more. So how do you, whenever I've seen a middleman enter into the system, be it in the honey industry, the livestock industry, wherever, it all looks wonderful at first, right? The numbers, oh my gosh, I better build this hog, confinement on my property. I'm going to make so much money. Um, and and at first it's all great, and then over time, the farmers' margins get thinner and thinner. The consumers pay more and more, and the guy in the middle always seems to do real, real well. How do you guard against that happening?
We take a lower margin. That is I would say, I mean, there's multiple ways we do that, but one is Natural Grocers, just we do not charge as much as other retailers, especially for the quality of the products we have and the nutrient density of the quality of the products we have,
How do I
for
know
what you're
that?
getting. So,
Yeah, how can I trust that? Because I don't see that very often, right?
I'll
yeah,
tell you,
I think,
Jonathan, because Christy has a full video team and we have 14 people that write curriculum and training for our staff and for our customers. And shopping in Natural Grocers is a damn university degree because we pummel you with information about this. But for
Hmm.
instance, when it came to Thousand Hills, we always set the price where they made money at the farm gate, and we educated the consumers about soil health, family, community, animal welfare, climate, all of that. That's what they're paying for a higher price. So we do it. It's incredibly expensive and time consuming. And thank goodness we've got people like Christy and her multiple teams backing this up. But your original question, I could easily throw most other retailers under the bus because those meat buyers, for instance, they look at spreadsheets in case pack and they have no idea where that meat's coming from.
Hmm.
And
I'll show
yeah.
you.
as far as the grass-fed, quote unquote, now grass finished label that's out there, if you see that without any kind of um, I'm going to say our certification or another one, is that it's all done by affidavit. They send in paperwork. If the paperwork looks good, they get that label. And that's very disconcerting to the consumer and disingenuous to the consumer. So, um, like I say, organic with the Real Organic Project. I mean, they're doing, we see our farms every 15 months. And the reason we do that instead of every year is that way you get to see the farm at different times of the year. We work with a huge group of producers and other organizations to make sure that what we're saying and what we're doing are the same thing. And, so,
Hmm.
I'm hoping that the powers that be that provide money and USDA will, and they're starting to identify more money to give to these farmers. And I'll get off.
Let's move on to Jennifer's question, Christy.
sure. Yeah. So Jennifer asks, do you anticipate that, quote, industrial regenerative products will start to be accepted by Whole Foods, et cetera, causing more customer confusion and potentially diluting products that are indeed organic, ROP, CNG, et cetera?
I don't think we
Without
I don't
mentioning
think we
Whole
call that Whole
Foods,
Foods. It's
the
just
answer is
Yeah, I'm
yes.
just
This
reading
is
what
what's
was written.
happening.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is what's happening.
yeah.
Very easy
So
question.
how do we feel about
Uh,
industrial regenerative products that might be accepted at any retailer, causing customer confusion?
Lindley, I think it's already happening, isn't it?
Well, unfortunately, what we've seen in organic is like the lowest standard is what ends up taking over the marketplace. So I think it's going to be really hard for the, real regenerative folks to find a marketplace when industrial regenerative is sharing the same label. It's why we needed another label another lane to differentiate ourselves. So it's problematic.
I had we've been working with a number of farmers. They're in Canada and they're certified regenerative with one of the certification programs. And the guy is like, they came to me and gave me this thing because they were trying to get more buy-in. And I'm shipping my grain on my farm down to a chicken CAFO that's also got the same certification down in the southern United States. And he's like, this doesn't feel regenerative to me. And you're right, it's not. But here we are. I'm hoping science will be able to help, but at the end of the day, by the time we save our place on this planet using our food system, there's a hell of a chance that we're not going to be calling it regenerative. My hope is we just call it food.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll
Jonathan,
move on. We have a
Question
couple
from
more.
Andrew. Christy, I'm answering other ones by typing in, but
Okay.
let's read Andrew's.
Yeah, I'll read Andrew's question. Are you all aware of the Sustainable Agricultural Initiative Regenerating Together platform? This international initiative is intended to bring alignment in the regenerative space and lead to standards. Then he says, IFOAM Organics International established an organic sector position statement about regenerative ag. What are your thoughts about this position statement?
I don't know the program. Show me the data.
same here.
I'll jump to the next question. And we had a couple more. I just want to make sure we can get through everything and then open up our live Q&A. From Hans Heron, our starting position should be agroecology. Organic agriculture is a subset, and regenerative, a subset of practices of organic agriculture. Or, I'm not quite sure if I'm reading that correctly. Our starting position should be agroecology. Organic agriculture is a subset, and regenerative is a subset of practices of organic agriculture. I think saying, does it have to be organic?
The agroecology is a political and economic sovereignty movement in addition to food. So we are moving towards that issue, and I typed a reply in there as well. It hyper complicates everything else, but it can't be ignored in the long run. Any disagreements among the panel? I got it right.
Awesome.
Well, we want.
I was just going to say that we are going to open it up for the audience comment period. If you guys can raise your hands, we'll go ahead and unmute you guys one at a time. And everyone should be able to turn on their cameras at this time as well. I believe it's unlocked in the meeting.
Let's see how the
And first hand raised, we'll call on.
Yes.
Elizabeth, do we want to take down the share at this point so everyone has more room to see each other?
Yes, we can do that.
There we go.
And certainly anybody participating, listening to now, we'd welcome your audience participation, questions, and comments. We are wanting this engagement on all of this meeting and the future meetings to feel like we are building a consensus standard, that there isn't one group preaching at an audience. That's really our goal here, is to get participation and hear from you so that we can work on this together and drill down on these loopholes and these really tough conversations where there is possibly real friction, and trying to understand what are the necessary requirements for a minimum standard claim. Not saying that it's at the pie in the sky top level regenerative, but for minimum claims in the marketplace.
So Andrew Hammermeister, if you wanted to go ahead and speak.
Well, sure, thanks. Thanks everyone for a very interesting conversation. I'm the director of the Organic Agriculture Centre of Canada at Dalhousie University in Nova Scotia, and I'd posed to that question about the regenerative agriculture program, the Regenerating Together program that the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative had put forward. They've been working on this for quite a while, and a lot of interesting work going into it. It is driven by major corporate interests that are kind of intermediaries in the process and trying to drive the regenerative ag platform. So one way or another, if there's going to be, and they're actually launching this program in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, at a major conference in this summer. So if we're engaging as an organic sector in developing or promoting, or beyond the organic sector even here, a regenerative standard, I think it's important that we also are at least aware of what these other standards are developing, because they are developing a standard and they're going to be moving towards, at least it's implied that they're moving towards some sort of certification as well. So anyway, that was just more of a comment than and a heads up.
No, that's good. We've had a number of comments like that and suggestions that everyone should be aware. We're working with everyone in this space, from the standard setting to certifications or whatever. So we have a very specific focus, which is setting up retailers to be gatekeepers. So apart from these sessions, we're working with other retailers and retail groups about why this is important and what the benefits and requirements are for them. But there are upwards of 60 different groups working on this from different perspectives with different goals. And we're trying to integrate all of that and actually elevate all of that at the same time. But our need wasn't getting addressed, which is the retail gatekeeping aspect. So does that help, Andrew?
Out of all of these 60 groups, how many of them are actually like measuring outcomes? Like measuring, is this doing anything? Is this helping? And especially from a third-party verifier, that would be really nice, huh? Somebody that isn't going to make money off of a certain result, because there's a real incentive right now, a financial incentive to being called regenerative. And so having that disconnect between folks that are actually saying is that this particular certification or something works or not, boy, that'd be awfully nice.
Jonathan, I'm going to jump in because it really gets my goat. Probably half of those are schemes that are claiming to show some minor environmental outcome improvement with minimal changes to conventional practices.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big greenwashing efforts that this program is trying to prevent.
We had one major, so Ecdysis is a nonprofit. We're monitoring ecosystems and trying to really help to understand what this whole stuff is. I don't have skin in the game. As far as the marketing of these things. And we had one major certifier come and talk with us about, third-party verification. I'm like, well, I yeah, I don't get behind any certification program or anything like that. That's beyond what I do, right? But we can try to, we can measure some of the farms that are in your program and stuff, and they're like, yeah, you're right. There does need to be independent third-party verification of our program. So they set up a nonprofit and then moved some of their workers over to the nonprofit to be their third-party verifier. And I was just like, oh, the greed
So
is
imagine
so
as part of this
pervasive at this
process,
point.
we had in
Alan,
place.
I'm gonna pause you because Brian Baker did want to make a comment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
Fine.
Thanks for recognizing me. And I, having spent many years on standard setting and third-party verification and building these systems going back to the 1980s, and 20 years on the IFOAM Standards Committee trying to harmonize international standards on what's organic. I like to say that if organic had stayed small, marginal, unprofitable, and insignificant, the corporations and the government would have left it alone. And we would have our nice little bubble where we have, local farms. Elliot Coleman is a tremendous inspiration to me, but we can't all be Elliot Colemans, right? And the food system can't function like his farm as the economy is currently structured. So we do have retail chains that are gatekeepers and that are big drivers, and they have to respond to their consumer base. My observation is, and I raised the word integrated in IPM. That's a label that really doesn't have legs because it was rendered essentially meaningless. It was anyone can play. You get, your participation medal for showing up and doing the count and spray thing. What I see happening with regenerative, I first heard about in the 1980s when Rodale coined the term because organic was under assault by the USDA. And they had to come up with another word to describe what they were doing because organic was verboten by Secretary of Agriculture John Block. Once the Organic Foods Production Act passed, the word regenerative sort of fell away. It was no longer needed. Its place, its function had been served. And it wasn't, I would observe that regenerative didn't reemerge until there was a growing lack of confidence in the organic label. So I prefer the Rodale approach of looking at organic being the floor, being the starting point, and regenerative going beyond that. And how we lost control of regenerative is a whole nother story. But I see regenerative becoming another meaningless label, like sustainable, like natural, like IPM.
That's the fear. Anyone else?
I can read one more question that came through.
Please.
So we have a question from Paul Labosco. How do you view Palantir's recent $300 million contract with USDA helpful or harmful to regenerative goals?
It scares the crap out of me, personally, as a farmer, as a rancher, as a multi-generational farmer rancher. I said crap and I'm like, it scares the shit out of me. Sorry. If there's anybody on here that disagrees with me, slap me, but that's just not, anyway.
I mean, if the goal is to get farmers off of federal subsidies, maybe this will help. I don't know.
There was no input, there was no public comment period, there was nothing. It was just like, anyway.
Behind closed doors. Well, any other questions, any other hand raises, anybody else that we can include in today's conversation? This is the first of multiple calls on focused topics, so this is not your last opportunity to jump in and be a part of what's going on.
So I've got Dag Falk. I'm sorry that you're having trouble with that button, but I am going to unmute you now, Dag.
Great, thank you. I'm out in nature hiking here and I'm all sweaty and I'm going to leave my camera off. The great conversation, great panel. I used to work for Nature's Path, and before that was an organic inspector, so I've been in the industry for close to 35 years now. And as I retired in 22, I started a not-for-profit in Canada called Responsible Organic Customer Association. We're trying to, address the lack of knowledge for consumers about organic. But now coming to my comment or question or redirection, perhaps, of our conversation, I think it all, like it's been mentioned sort of through many of the comments and discussions we've had, but I'm going to name it more more directly and call it out more. And I think the issue is honesty and lack of honesty. And if we sort that, a lot of these detailed problems that we have, these problems that have very detailed and convoluted potential solutions. I think the solutions get simplified if we come from a frame of, is it honest? Is it not honest? Do we tolerate dishonesty? How do we respond to dishonesty? How do we correct or penalize or call out dishonesty? And I think if we look to the organic movement, in a way, that's what the organic movement did. It called out dishonesty. It was market produce was sold at the farmers market, and then increasingly fraudulent claims were made. And other organic farmers and some consumers noticed this and said, we need a label. We need somebody to say this has been verified, this has been checked out. Somebody who knows what they're doing has looked into this. And that's calling out the dishonesty. And I'm wondering what that frame can do and where that can take us if we put as a goal to implement that framework into trying to solve the problem that we're trying to solve right now for regenerative. Thanks.
I'm following
Thank
the
you,
rules
Dag.
by raising my hands.
You're doing a good job, Alan. Go for it. And then I will get you, Josephine, after this.
Hey, Dag, it's really good to hear from you. I want to point out that the number of people on here that are so vastly more qualified and knowledgeable than I am is spectacular. And I just want to honor all of you for being here and participating. It's really extraordinary. Dag, I didn't know about the ROCA organization. I'm glad to hear it. What this comes down to is empowering customers, shoppers in the stores to ask those questions. And we've seen this in other campaigns. But when we distill this down to empowered questions that somebody can walk up to a meat counter, the produce section, the packaged goods section, and ask someone in the aisle, a worker in the aisle, what does this mean? Does this fulfill this need? And these are informed questions that are backed up, but they're understandable, and they're done in a context of the normal busy, overwhelmed, complicated world that a shopper lives in with their toddlers trying to fill a basket. But that's what Natural Grocers does best. And we're not the only ones. It's that independent natural foods group that we work closely with that does that the best. And honesty is I think you're absolutely right. There's just thumbs up on that. And I hope someone else wants to chime in and broaden that thought that honesty is what's driving all of this. 3 minutes, come on.
Excellent. Yeah, go ahead, Josephine.
Thank you, and thank you so much for this fantastic discussion. I'm really enjoying it. I'm from the European Alliance for Regenerative Agriculture, a farmer-led alliance hosted by farmers and managed by farmers, and just wanted to also go into that honesty discussion. I think that's so vital, and thank you for bringing it up, because that's really what we need to install in all sectors, might it be retail or banking, insurance, with all of the different ones that we are also working with. And I just want to do a shout out also for the data, because we have just published last June a big study where we have put out the Regenerating Full Productivity Index, which by no means is good. We are learning on the way. We're trying to be as much as you, getting everyone in and getting feedback on it. But we've published data from Europe, from states, from all of our states, all of our pedoclimatic zones on yield, income, inputs, climate, biodiversity, and water. And we are currently putting another multi-year study together for the next 3 years. And we welcome any feedback and sort of needs also for what data is needed. So this is a warm welcome to join us in that journey. And then I want to also say that we published the Regen Compass, which validates all of the currently that you're speaking of, maybe the 60 validation frameworks out there against pharma principles in Regen Ag. And we've tried 30 until now. It's a lot of work, so we're trying another 30. And also for that, we're trying to permanently increase the level in our methodology. So if you want to reach out, please do. We're trying our best to get all of the data open source free out to the world. And it's all visible also on our new website coming up. That's it. Thank you.
Could you give me the website real quick? Because I can't see who's speaking.
Yeah, it's iara.farm. I'll put it in the chat to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. And then I
And
do
where
have
you where are you
closest-
dialed in from? Are you in Europe?
Oh, there we go.
Thanks. Yes, in Germany. And we farm in 22 countries in Europe.
Nice. Okay. Well,
And then
thank you for being here.
To close us out, I have one more question from Ken McCormick. It says, research by the organic industry identifies that the majority of North American food buyers didn't know that the organic certification standard prohibits the use of genetic engineering. How do we sell them any of these new certification standards? And I'll leave that to the panelists.
Elizabeth, say that one more time. I'm sorry. Read it one more time.
So it establishes research by the organic industry identifies that the majority of North American food buyers did not know that the organic certification standard prohibits the use of genetic engineering. And then Ken asks, how do we sell consumers any of these new certification standards? For instance, regenerative.
Okay, so this is a hot topic issue. I think the non-GMO project made a big mistake in not requiring organic to be part of it. Because you're right, more customers look for the non-GMO label over organic, even though organic is non-GMO plus so much more. So as a good food movement together, we need to foresee, what's going to come for regenerative, for example. Customer expectation is that regenerative is organic plus so much more. If you ask any customer if it's regenerative to put pesticides or synthetics down or fertilizers, they're going to say no. So we need to match customer expectation with what we do as a movement together when we introduce labels, or even if it's just point of purchase labeling by a grocery store. So I applaud Natural Grocers for taking this issue on. I think we really messed up with the non-GMO movement.
All right, that's why I'm on that board, just to have that point of view. Just so you know, for the record. That's what I believe. Lots of friction. We're a little bit out of time. I think we could go on forever. I just want to encourage a couple of things. Use that reply area to comment, make public comments of any length. Those don't go into the ether. We'll be compiling them and synthesizing them. And watch for announcements about additional sessions like this coming up probably as early as June. Well, definitely the next one in June, not sure which one it is, and spread the word. This is a long-term commitment for us, and Christy's just done a fantastic job of starting to implement our internal standards on this question with our brands and supply chain. So any last thoughts, panelists?
Well, thanks to Christy and everybody at Natural Grocers. First of all, is that if the farm bill is being marked up and it was just voted on by the House and passed with some horrible things in it, pesticide. The other thing I want everybody on this call, and it's something that for the last 20 years, when I go to Washington with Elizabeth seeing me do this, Alan seeing me do this, it's not the farm bill, it's the food bill. And let's start calling it that and calling these people out for the BS that they're doing. So you need to pay attention to that. There's no way to do it without us. And this is just egregious what they passed yesterday. So call them and yell at them.
Thank you,
thanks, everyone.
everybody.
Watch that event page for follow-ups. Christy?
No, that's it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all the participants. We'll look forward to the next time together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.